Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. So imagine for a second that God wasn't the creator of the universe, but actually a middle manager.
Right, the middle manager invented by early farmers just to make sure nobody slacked off in the fields.
Exactly. And imagine that when modern society finally killed God, we didn't actually become free. We just replaced him with a new boss.
A very ruthless boss called the economy.
Yeah. Today, we are doing a deep dive into a text that claims your job, your guilt, and even your atheism are all part of the exact same ancient trap.
We are unpacking on the inhumanity of religion by Raoul Vaneigem. And it is quite the opener to start with that premise.
It is, but it captures the spirit of the text perfectly. I mean, this isn't a theology lesson.
No, not at all. We aren't here to debate whether miracles are real or which scripture is historically accurate. Vaneigem is looking at religion as a piece of technology.
Right, like software.
Exactly, like a very specific tool designed to solve a messy economic problem.
So it's less about faith and more about function. He's essentially arguing that religion is the software humanity installed to justify working ourselves to death.
To justify hating our own bodies and bowing down to hierarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah, our mission for this deep dive is to unpack that radical argument.
And before we outline exactly how we're going to do that, I have a quick request. If you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button.
You really help support the deep dives. So to give you a roadmap of where we are going today, we are going to trace Vaneigem's history of humanity.
Starting with what he calls the free prehistoric life.
Right, and moving into the enslaved agricultural life. We will see how God was invented to manage the scarcity that came with farming.
We'll look at his critique of specific religions, too, including why he thinks atheism is often just religion in a new disguise.
And finally, we will arrive at his conclusion, which is that modern capitalism is actually a death cult.
It's a wild ride from the Stone Age to Wall Street.
It really is. So let's go back, way back. Because to understand his view on God, you really have to understand his view on the caveman.
Right, and I think most of us have that classic stereotype of prehistory. Nasty, brutish, and short.
The Hobbesian view, yeah.
Yeah, we picture early humans shivering in caves, starving, constantly running away from saber-toothed tigers.
And Vaneigem says that view is just objectively wrong. He leans on anthropological evidence here.
Like Marshall Solon's work.
Exactly. Salmon's work on the original affluent society. He uses that to argue that the Paleolithic era was actually a time of abundance.
But how do you have abundance without supermarkets or, even basic refrigeration?
Well, you have it when your needs are low, and nature just provides them freely. The estimate is that hunter-gatherers worked, if you can even call it that, maybe 2 to 4 hours a day.
Wow, 2 hours. I think I spend 2 hours just deleting spam emails before I even start my actual work.
All right. And that contrast is his whole point. The rest of their time was spent sleeping, playing, eating, and socializing.
So there was no grind.
No grind at all. Vaneigem uses the Latin word religio here. The root means to link or to bond.
Okay.
He argues early humans had a true religio, a direct bond with nature. They didn't worship the forest. They were just part of it.
Because there was no separation between man and God.
Exactly, because the concept of a master didn't exist yet. The world was a playground, not a workplace.
So if we were working 2 hours a day and basically hanging out in a giant garden, what happened? What was the fall from grace? Because clearly we aren't there anymore.
The fall wasn't eating an apple, it was planting a seed. The fall was the Neolithic Revolution.
The invention of agriculture?
Yeah.
This is a really hard pivot for a lot of people to swallow because we are taught in school that farming is the birth of civilization, like it's when we got smart.
But Vaneigem calls it the beginning of slavery.
Because it shifts humanity from a gathering civilization to a production civilization.
Exactly. In a gathering society, you just take what is there. But in an agricultural society, you are battling the earth to force it to produce.
You become dependent on the harvest.
And the moment you are dependent on a harvest, you introduce this new psychological virus into the human mind, anxiety.
Anxiety about the future, like will it rain or will the crops fail?
Will we starve next winter?
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is where the logic gets fascinatingly dark. Once you have a harvest, you have a surplus. You have grain piles.
And once you have a pile of grain, you need a place to put it. You build a granary.
And what happens when you have a granary full of food and the neighboring tribe is hungry?
You need a wall to keep them out.
Right. And to man the wall, you need soldiers. And to organize the soldiers and distribute the grain, you need a headman or a king.
So agriculture creates the granary creates the wall, and the wall creates the class system.
You draw that direct line. Inside the wall, you have civilization, which is really just a system of protecting property.
And outside the wall is the wild, the threat.
But here is the internal problem. The king takes the most grain. The soldiers take the next share. The peasant, who actually broke his back in the field, gets the scraps.
So how do you stop the peasant from revolting? I mean, you can't just beat them forever. There are too many of them.
Right, you need a story.
Enter the priest.
Enter the priest. Venegum argues that God is simply the projection of earthly tyranny into the sky.
You create a master in the heavens to justify the masters on earth?
Exactly. If a peasant asks, why do I have to suffer in the fields while the king eats grapes? The answer becomes, it is the will of the great Sky Father.
Your suffering is your destiny.
That's the mechanism.
That is just incredibly cynical. To view the divine not as the source of creation, but as a management tool for economic inequality.
In this analysis, yes. He links the birth of gods directly to that fear of scarcity we talked about.
When you are terrified of a drought, you start bargaining.
I will give you this goat if you make it rain. You create rituals to control the uncontrollable. God becomes the ultimate landlord.
And we are just the tenants trying to pay rent.
Yeah.
Which leads us into the second part of his argument, which I found even more disturbing, honestly, because it's not just about politics or economics.
No, he goes deeper.
He says religion fundamentally breaks the human being. It mutilates us.
This is the psychological cost of that rent. The central conflict for Venegum is the war between the spirit and the flesh, or the body.
Okay, let's define terms here, because usually spirit is the good guy, right? Spirit is pure and eternal and holy, and the body is just the vessel.
The body that gets sick and dirty and decays.
Yeah.
Venegum completely flips that upside down.
Yeah.
He says spirit is just code for work.
Wow.
Spirit is the part of you that obeys rules, denies impulses, and follows orders. The body, on the other hand, is the source of desire, pleasure, play, and vitality.
So for the economy of the city-state to function, the body has to be crushed.
Think about it. If you are focused on your own pleasure, if you are listening to your body's desire to rest or play,
You aren't going to spend 12 hours threshing wheat for the king.
right, you are a bad worker. So religion steps in to demonize the body
It makes pleasure a sin.
and makes pain a virtue. This is what he calls the inversion of life.
Religion teaches that life is a trial, a sickness.
Something to be endured until you die. Because the only cure is death, which leads to the afterlife. It's a brilliant mechanism, really.
It convinces the slave that his suffering is actually a sign of his holiness.
Yes.
There's this section where he talks about the obsession with rituals.
Yeah.
And it's not just the big commandments, it's the intense micromanagement of daily life.
Oh, yeah. He brings up things like Talmudic debates or specific monastic rules about bathroom habits.
Like Rabbi Akiba discussing which hand to use or which direction to face.
It sounds totally absurd to us now, but Venegum says this is highly intentional.
Because if you can make a person feel guilty about how they go to the bathroom, you own them completely.
It's constant self-policing. You are never off the clock from God's surveillance.
It creates a perpetual state of neurotic submission.
You are always doing something wrong, so you're always in debt.
Let's look at the specific targets he hits here, because he doesn't spare anyone. He starts with the Old Testament God, YHWH.
Right. He describes YHWH as the ultimate agrarian god, a god of war and scarcity,
A jealous landlord who demands absolute obedience.
which perfectly fits the harsh reality of early tribes fighting for fertile land. It's a blood-for-land contract.
But then he shifts to Christianity, and the critique totally changes. He calls the Christian God a commercial god. What does he mean by that?
This is a really key insight in the book. He argues that as the Roman Empire grew, the economy shifted from purely agricultural to commercial.
So trade coins contracts.
Exactly. And Christianity adapted to this. Instead of sacrificing a literal goat, the sacrifice became abstract.
It became financial in a way.
In a spiritual sense, yes. Venegum views salvation as a transaction. You are essentially buying back your soul.
Because you are born in debt, original sin.
And you spend your entire life making installment payments through prayer denial and repentance. It universalized the concept of debt.
It turns the soul into a ledger. You're always in the red, just trying to get back to zero.
And he doesn't let the other major religions off the hook either.
No, he critiques Islam for its patriarchal structure.
Yeah, he quotes the line, "Women are your fields." He links the subjugation of women directly back to that agricultural view of property.
Like women produce children the way fields produce grain, therefore they must be owned and walled off.
Exactly. And then there's Buddhism.
which usually gets a pass in Western philosophy as the sort of chill religion.
But Venegam sees it as a philosophy of resignation.
If Christianity says suffer now for a reward later, Buddhism, in his view, says suffering is an illusion, so just accept it.
Right. He argues this passivity allowed feudal oppression to persist for centuries in places like Tibet because it just diffused the anger of the oppressed.
Now, here is where it gets really interesting for a lot of modern listeners. I know there are people right now thinking, well, lucky me, I'm an atheist.
I believe in science or the state or progress.
I'm free of all this superstition.
And Venegam is waiting for them with a trapdoor. He argues that modern atheism is often just Christianity without the cross.
How so? That seemed like a massive contradiction.
Because the structure is identical. You might have killed God in the sky, but you replaced him with a new extraction on earth.
The state, the race, the proletariat, the economy.
History itself. You're just swapping one big invisible boss for another.
Think about the rhetoric of the 20th century. We must sacrifice our comfort today for the glory of the nation.
Or we must purge the dissidents for the future of the revolution. Venegam says that is religion.
You are still sacrificing the living, breathing human being for a phantom higher cause.
That hits really hard. It forces you to look at your own political beliefs and ask, am I actually worshiping this?
He essentially says that if you are an atheist who believes in historical necessity or market forces that demand human suffering, you haven't escaped religion at all.
You've just secularized the sacrifice. You are still kneeling. You just changed the name of the altar.
And that brings us to the most powerful and honestly terrifying part of his argument.
The economy of sacrifice.
The religion that actually conquered the world isn't Christianity or Islam, it's the economy.
Yes, segment 3. He draws a direct line from the stone altar to the New York Stock Exchange.
So the core mechanism is still sacrifice.
Absolutely. In the old days, you might kill a corn king or sacrifice a bull to appease the gods so the harvest wouldn't fail.
It was a blood price paid to scarcity.
And Venegam says, look around. We are still doing it.
But we aren't killing goats.
No, we sacrifice people to austerity measures. We sacrifice entire generations to market corrections.
When politicians say we have to cut healthcare to save the economy, how is that different from saying we have to kill this virgin to save the harvest?
It isn't. You're sacrificing the living for the abstraction. The economy must survive, even if the people in it don't.
He calls money the new logos, the new word of God.
Money is the universal translator. It takes a completely unique thing, a forest, a human hour, a piece of art, and turns it into a number.
It makes everything interchangeable. He uses this term commercial humanism. It sounds nice on paper, but he means it cynically right.
Very cynically. He points out that the free market just replaced the arbitrary cruelty of feudal lords with the rational cruelty of the market.
We didn't stop killing captives because we got nicer.
No, we stopped because it became more profitable to employ them or to put them in debt.
And this evolves into what he calls parasitic capitalism.
Which is where we are right now. It's not even about making goods anymore, not shoes or tables. It's about financial speculation.
Money making money.
He describes the economy as a literal death cult because it feeds on life. It takes your time, your energy, your nerves, and converts them into capital.
And the stock market is treated exactly like a divine entity. Just listen to the financial news.
The market is jittery. The market demands confidence. We must appease the market.
We talk about it like it's a dragon living in a cave that will burn us all if we don't feed it.
And the fuel for this entire engine is still that old religious feeling. Guilt.
The secular original sin.
The feeling that you haven't produced enough today. The anxiety that you are wasting time if you just sit and watch the clouds.
That guilt is the whip that keeps the system running without a literal slave driver.
You drive yourself. You feel guilty for just existing without earning it.
So we are trapped in a planetary temple where we sacrifice our lives to the god of money, fueled by a deep internalized sense of inadequacy.
It is an incredibly bleak diagnosis of total alienation.
So does Venegam offer a way out? Or is the book just a 300-page suicide note?
No, he actually offers a solution. But it's not a political reform.
You can't vote your way out of this.
No, because the political parties are just different denominations of the church of the economy. He proposes a fundamental shift in consciousness.
He calls this the vitalist argument.
Yes. He says we need to replace the will to power, which is about controlling, owning, and dominating, with the will to live.
The will to live, it sounds so simple, almost biological.
But it's revolutionary in this context. It means rejecting the spirit, that internalized voice of duty and work, and reclaiming the consciousness of the body.
It means stopping the mutilation of our desires.
So instead of viewing your body as a tool to get things done, you view it as the actual point of existence.
He wants to turn the sacred back into play.
Remember the hunter-gatherers we talked about? They played. Life wasn't a ritual to appease a scary god. It was a direct engagement with the world.
Veranum wants to dissolve the wall between the sacred, the church, the office, the serious stuff, and the profane play love rest.
He has this beautiful image of what to do with the churches.
He doesn't want to burn them down, right?
No, he wants to repurpose them. He imagines cathedrals turned into greenhouses, playgrounds, libraries, labyrinths for lovers.
He wants to take the space that religion monopolized, the very center of the community, and fill it with human joy instead of somber worship.
It's a lovely vision, reclaiming the space for the living. But he also warns us, the system is smart and it knows we're unhappy.
That's his warning against green capitalism or the wellness industry.
Veranum completely foresaw this. He warned that the system would try to sell us our own desire for life back to us.
Like buying a mindfulness app so you can be more productive at your corporate job.
Exactly. If you are doing yoga just so you can handle a 60-hour work week without snapping, you aren't liberating yourself.
You're just doing maintenance on the machine.
That is the new disguise of the exact same religious impulse.
So the solution isn't to consume better or greener things. It's to fundamentally change your relationship with time and yourself.
It's about prioritizing the quality of your lived experience over the quantity of your economic output.
It's realizing that the guilt you feel for taking a nap isn't a moral failing.
No, it's a conditioned reflex installed by 10,000 years of agrarian history.
That is the big takeaway for me. We are carrying around the baggage of Neolithic farmers every single time we clock in.
We really are. And Veranum challenges us to drop it, to realize that the gods, whether it's YHWH or the S&P 500, are just projections of our own power.
We built them, which means we can dismantle them. This has been a heavy but deeply enlightening unpacking of iconogenation on the inhumanity of religion. As we wrap up, what is the one final thought you want to leave the listener with?
I want to leave you with a provocative thought to test yourself with. We spend our entire lives sacrificing our present happiness for a promised future.
We suffer through school for a job.
We suffer through a job for a promotion. We suffer through a career for retirement. We consistently sacrifice the now for a later that might never actually come.
It's the exact same structure as sacrificing a goat for a better harvest next year.
Or suffering on earth for a reward in heaven. So my question for you is this.
Okay.
Think about the very concept of free time. We define our rest purely by its relationship to our labor. It's a weekend or a vacation, a gap in the work.
Right.
If you stopped believing in that future payoff, if you stopped defining your existence merely by the breaks in your own exploitation, what would your daily life actually look like?
Are you living for yourself or are you just maintaining the machinery?
Are you living or just maintaining the machinery?
That is the question. Thank you for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We will see you on the next deep dive.